youngsters. Great chance here! That does it! Steve McGavin! And for the first time, Colchester United have won a major final.
Still Garcia, finally the company arrives and it's in! It's a freak-out goal from Ricardo Carvalho. Richard Garcia wants the credit and the shock is on at the bridge.
And it's promotion for Colchester United. They've made it into the Championship for the first time in 69 years.
Porter, being held. There is Porter, and that's Maguire.
Welcome to Beyond The Barside, the podcast that covers all things Colchester United and a little bit beyond, because we are extending beyond Colchester United specifically, as this week we're joined by one of the most respected voices in football finance, Mr. Kieran Maguire. A little bit of insight. Kieran is a football finance expert and co-host of the hugely popular podcast, The Price of Football. We are incredibly honoured to be speaking to you, Kieran. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thanks very much for the invite. A bafflingly successful. We're possibly the only podcast that's looking forward to the day when we call it a day, because it's a bad news show, because there's so many wrong uns in football, and that dominates the stories that I tend to cover. With my co-host Kevin Day, who some of you may know from Match the Day 2 and 5 Live, Channel 4 Racing, Channel 4 cricket coverage, and so on. But yeah, we started 7 years ago, both expecting it was going to die. You know, you get 3 or 4 episodes, nobody will listen, and I think now we're just racking up to our 20 millionth download, which for a guy that teaches accounting for a living is ludicrous.
Certainly, and as you say, the Price of Football has become hugely popular amongst supporters across the football pyramid. Why do you think fans are now becoming more and more interested in the financial side of football more than before?
Well, I think it's partly due to the rise of 24-hour consumption of the side that you love. So the first thing you do in the morning is you check your Twitter feed, and you'll check YouTube. Is there anything gone up? We have had the introduction of cost control rules, which have been used and abused by clubs, and that's provoked quite an emotional reaction. We've seen people come into football and buy success, and that's created a reaction, both positive and negative. And I think it's your club. You know, it's part of your identity, your history, your heritage, your town, and I think fans feel that it gives them an additional opportunity to hold the owners to account, and also to try to get a feeling. If we finished 16th in League One last season, were we overperforming? Were we underperforming? Yeah, you look at Colchester this season, we get 12th in League Two. Well, where does that put us? Because we all know that football's a money game. The talent follows the money, and if we got a mid-table budget and you finish mid-table, it's not going to be that memorable, but it to a certain extent is excusable.
Certainly is, and it sort of reflects the state that the club's in from a financial perspective, and the U's owner at time of recording, Robbie Cowlin, has been quite transparent in terms of where he feels the budget sits in that sort of football league space, particularly in League Two. But from a sort of more Colchester specific background, what are the biggest financial challenges for the clubs towards the bottom of the EFL pyramid, specifically League Two, in this current climate?
What we've seen, especially since COVID finished, is that we've learned absolutely nothing about the dangers, the existential dangers that exist within football from a business point of view. The losses in League One and League Two have increased significantly. If you get to League One, then on average it's going to cost you 120 grand a week for the privilege of playing in that league. I've noticed as far as League Two is concerned, the losses, which 4 or 5 years ago were perhaps 800 or 900 grand a year, and people say it's not a lot of money. Well, how many of us have got 800 or 900 grand to spare in a year? Well, the average losses in League Two are now 50 grand a week. So you're relying on an individual or a group of people to pick up the phone once a month. They'll get a call from the chief executive or the financial officer and say, yeah, it's payroll in 3 days. I need 120 grand to cover the wage costs. And then if the phone goes silent, if you're that chief executive, it's fingers crossed. It's an incredibly precarious business. Nobody's making money. I've got all of the figures here from League Two sitting in front of me in a spreadsheet, and every single club in 24-25 lost money, and some of those losses were ludicrous for clubs. You think, well, they didn't do that much, did they? Port Vale, I appreciate I think Port Vale went up, didn't they? But that cost them over 100 grand a week. Fleetwood, it cost them over 100 grand a week. Gillingham, over 100 grand a week, and so on. So it's no way to run a business. But then you say to yourself, well, hold on, is football a business? You're not in love with Colchester United because of the brand. It's something bigger than that. You cannot explain to a non-football fan why you have this affection, why you have this. And we always say, outside of your family, it's the biggest love affair that you'll have in your life. And it's the most constant love affair of your life. And it's a bit like having children with your relationship with your football club, in the sense you don't always like them, but you always love them. And you keep coming back. How many times will you have walked away, especially you've been midweek, you've slept your way up to Doncaster, you've been tonked 3 or 4-0, and you say you've got to get all the way back to Colchester, and you go, right, never again. That's it, I've had enough. And by the time you wake up the following morning, we've got Grimsby at home on Saturday. Looking forward to it. And it's this amazing relationship that we have as football fans, which makes me really proud to be a football fan on so many levels. But equally, it's spectacularly stupid. I think we secretly know that as well. It's a bit like believing in Father Christmas.
Yeah,
we know it's not true, but it is part of us.
Yeah, and so, sorry if I'm broadening this out too quickly, but do you? I mean, we spoke before. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. You said it's a bad news podcast, to be honest, because it speaks to the quality of your podcast. That sometimes after an episode, I feel quite depressed at the state of everything. Do you? And again, sorry if this is too broad. I think there's an assumption, like those figures you just gave, and people just say, "Oh, it's only this much. It's only 50 grand a week. It's only 100 grand a week." Do you see there being maybe too strong a word, but a reckoning, or do you think football will just find a way to stay in this bubble?
I think it will continue until 20 or 30. Let's be honest, blokes wake up and say, "Why am I doing this?" Yeah, because it's costing me 50, 100 grand a week. My kids are being called names at school because the club's doing badly. I'm being abused on social media. Somebody's just egged me car coming out of the director's car park after we just lost at home. And they will say that this is absolute madness. But the very fact that we got through COVID, which was a period where there was no money coming into football, and we've started to get, we don't even talk about COVID anymore in terms of the impact on football, but there's still that hangover. I can assure you, in terms of the financial consequences to the game, I don't think it'll ever learn, and that's both good and bad. It's bad in the way that I think there will be more people coming in, and we sometimes call this the find a bigger fool theory. I've tried to run a football club. I've done it for so many years, and I'm looking at Colchester United here. The owner is owed 40 million quid. Probably now 42, 43, because I've got my figures at the end of 2025. And somebody will come in and say, don't worry, I'm a success in my business. I know how to run. I know what a budget is. And they'll talk a talk. And then 6 months later, the manager comes into him and says, look, we're ninth in League Two. Just seen this lad playing for Carlisle. I think he's really tasty. I can get him for 50 or 60 grand. Yeah, they don't want a big fee for him, but he's really good. Trouble is, we're paying wages of, let's say, 2.5 grand a week. He wants 3.5, or he wants 4 grand a week to come down. If we give him a 2.5-year contract, I reckon he'll do it. He could get us into the playoffs. And the chief executive, the head says no, and the heart says, well, I'll have a word with the owner. And Robbie picks up the phone, or wherever it's going to be. I can't really afford it, but let's just do it. Let's go for it, because football's all about going for it. And then it doesn't work out, and you're on the hook for that 3.5 grand a week for the next 2.5 years. So football's got a history of not learning how to be sensible. I don't know whether you ever saw the Welcome to Wrexham, the Sunderland Till I Die documentary.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
But the absolute box office, and the signing of Will Grigg, for me, that 3 minutes sums up everything that is wrong with football and everything that is barking mad brilliant about football as well. Because the manager says don't go above 1.2, 1.3 million. And the owner says, of course I won't. I run a successful business. By the end of that little shot, he's paid £3 million for a striker, and the manager's just going, oh, and I just don't believe this. And of course, I don't get promoted, and the lad gets abused because people expect he's going to be the answer to your problems. And that's what we think of football. You'll, over the course of this summer, you'll be glued to your local newspaper. You'll be listening to Radio Essex. You'll be following various hashtags, and you get linked with somebody, and it's straight onto YouTube. Let's check out his YouTube reel. Let's go to Transfer Market. Let's look at history, and it gives us something to do. And I think football is wonderful in that sense, because life's pretty tough at present. There's not a lot to look forward to. The economy's tanking. There's things happening on a global scale. Football's our great escape, and having something to hang on to with these 3 or 4 lads that we've just signed could make the difference. I think is a wonderful part of life.
Certainly is. And you speak about sort of having that affinity for football and that sort of that love for it, even if you don't like it at times. And you look at owners like Frank Rothwell at Oldham, who has an affinity with the club and the local area, and his motivations are really, really clear as to why he's involved. We also have sort of nameless or faceless consortium groups that are made up of sort of 5 to 10 different people all putting their money in. What would you say is the motivation for them getting involved in football ownership, when you've already said it's not a moneymaker, it's not a good business move?
There is a belief that if you get it right, you can get it spectacularly right. So if we take a look at the case of, if we go at the top level of football, the Glazers, they put about £70 million of their own money into Manchester United. And they probably made, if they sell all of their shares, they will walk away with a profit of £4 billion. At Liverpool, John Henry bought Liverpool Football Club for 300 million. It's worth 12 times that amount now. Going to lower league, and everybody wishes that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney had rocked up at their ground. Because I was talking to some, because they nearly bought Hartlepool. It was Hartlepool or Wrexham. It was that close. They bought Wrexham Football Club for £2 million. They're going to make 150 times the amount of money that they put in. So if you get it right, it's spectacularly right. But it is a bit like betting on a horse in the Grand National or buying a scratch card. The chances are you're not, and there are many, many tales of people who have put money either into their local football club, or they form these consortiums. They've got a bit of spare cash. I've got friends who own sort of, a quarter of a racehorse, and they go along and they'll watch it at Wolverhampton, or they'll watch it at Stockwell, wherever it's going to be, and they just say, we do it for the enjoyment, we do it for the giggles. It doesn't win very often. We've got to pay the bets fees, we've got to go and pay the training fees, we've got to go and pay to enter the race, but it's a hobby, and for some rich people, it is a hobby which they hope, if everything falls into place, again, it's a bit like buying that racehorse, could make me a load of money, and if it doesn't, well, what else am I going to do with it? You can only have 2 or 3 apartments. You can only have 2 or 3 flash cars. I get to occasionally speak to club owners, and one of them said, I'll make more money today than you'll probably make in 10 years. So it's up to me what I do with it. And the fact that I'm losing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds a year, I can afford to do it. So it's the equivalent of perhaps me or you, going down the arcade and spending 20 minutes on a one-armed bandit and walking night off. It cost me 5 or 6 quid, but I had a bit of a giggle with my mates or whatever it's going to be. And you don't think of it, because on a percentage basis, a lot of these people have so much wealth, especially if they have a consortium, and if they get it right on the pitch, you're going to have 5,000 or 6,000 people chanting your name. You're going to have that open top bus tour around town because you've been promoted or you've been the champions of a particular league. And it's also, when you talk, it's a place to do business. You can invite friends around who you might be want to trying to impress, and you might be trying to do a deal on something else. That was the purpose of the FIFA 22 World Cup in Qatar. People said it cost Qatar somewhere in the region of 20 or 30 billion pounds, but as far as Qatar was concerned, they made their money back because they were hosting dignitaries, people from natural resources companies and so on, got their country on the map. No complaints from the Qataris, I can assure you, and yet it cost them a fortune.
I suppose the danger there is whether it's on the whim of a particular person or group of people can dictate, the future of your club entirely. And I guess, is that something that the football regulator will be able to protect?
The football regulator will be able to turn the dial down.
Right.
If you've got a rogue owner, the regulator should be able to spot them earlier than the EFL. The fact that you've got to now give budgets, and those budgets have got to be deemed to be realistic. The way that the regulator works, you've got David Cogan, who's top, and then you've got Richard Monks, who's sort of the day-to-day guy, and then you've got sort of tiers. And I've done some work with the regulator. I'm a teacher, people who don't know, and I teach football finance, which I know some people are going to say, finance, that's not a proper subject. But the numbers, when you get to teach it, it's actually quite good fun. And effectively, it's a bit like having a rep, that you will have individual staff members at the regulator who are looking after perhaps 7 or 8 clubs, and they go around and visit those clubs once a month. They check on the finances. And what they can do is they can start to identify things before they become a crisis. It's spotting the iceberg before it's right in front of your boat. So I think it can help from that point of view. I'm intrinsically a bit of a free marketeer, so I'm not that keen on the concept of a regulator, but I'm even less keen on the prospect of Super League. I'm certainly not keen on the abomination that was Project Big Picture, which transferred all of the control of the 92 clubs. They were going to be taken to by 6 clubs. So I'm against that. So I think the regulator, to a certain extent, it's a classic case of the least bad option to protect football. When Bury got into trouble, and I think you could see that one coming quite easily. They were outmanoeuvred by Steve Dale, who was the rogue owner, who about to. I think he's potentially gone bankrupt since then, and so on. But I remember going to some meetings at Bury Town Hall because I used to live in Manchester, and I'd just go along as sort of the useful nerd, because football's very emotional, and as a nerd, I've got no emotions. I just go along. So these are the numbers. This is how much money you need. This is how this works in this type of monetary environment, and so on. So I got to know a few Bury fans, and remember, just that was a huge story. And it was a business which had an annual revenue of £3 million. That's peanuts. Think of the number of retailers that go bust every single week, the number of restaurants that go bust. Well, they'll be turning over as much money as a League Two football club. And yet this was a really big story. And I got to know some of the Bury fans, and I sort of, I went up to see some of them afterwards. If I'm a Brighton fan, so if Brighton were playing in the Northwest, I'd pop up and have a chat with them and so on, or meet them in town. I say, what's it like? And one of them said to me, you know what it's like when there's it's an FA Cup weekend and you've already been knocked out and your opponents haven't. So you know how boring that is. Or it's an international break weekend and you've got 3 or 4 lads who've ended up being picked. So therefore, imagine that 52 weeks of the year. And I go, I just couldn't contemplate that. That sense of community, that sense of belonging is so important. I think that having a regulator can help to preserve. Ultimately, if you've got a scumbag in charge who wants to destroy a football club, there's not much that the regulator can do. But we can hopefully identify those people before they get into a position of power. So can we guarantee there'll be no more collapses at football clubs? Absolutely not. Can we hope that as a result of having the regulator, there will be fewer? I think that will be the test of success or otherwise of the regulator.
Mm-hmm. And you speak about those sorts of safety nets in place to minimise the risk of sort of rogue people coming in. Colchester United are in a unique position at the moment where we're subject to speculation around potential investment and takeover discussions. Generally speaking, what should supporters realistically expect when a takeover is discussed?
Well, anybody that is involved in a takeover now has to pass the EFL, Owners and Directors Test. And that's being replaced. I think they're calling it the Owners and Senior Executives. I think they've expanded the remit from as far as the independent football regulator is concerned. So, first of all, is this person a scumbag? Yeah. So let's take a look at the scumbag test. Are you a convicted criminal? Have you been involved in fraud of any type? Have you been involved in a football club going into administration more than once? So I think these are sort of fairly big red flags. They should be relatively easy to check as far as both the EFL and the IFR are concerned. Secondly, what they're going to ask is, can you afford to buy the club and not just pay off Robbie for the agreed fee or whoever? Whatever that sum is going to be. I'll be honest, I don't think he's going to get his £40 million back. By the way,
he's always said, to be fair, and that's one thing that comes up and when you get the accounts through Kieran and you like to discuss it on Twitter. There's always people go, we're never going to sell because Robbie's not going to get 40 million. He's been very consistent.
Yeah,
tongue in cheek and seriously. Yeah. He says, do you seriously think I'm expecting to get that money back? So.
Exactly. And I was saying early to Aaron, it's a bit like the bank of mum and dad in terms of the relationship between a football club owner and the football club. And I always sort of give the analogy, when one of my kids passed their driving test, I was, first of all, very pleased for the kid. Secondly, I'd been paying for the driving lessons, so I never realised just how expensive driving lessons have become. And then 6 weeks later, it's Dad, I'm driving Mum's car. It's a Nissan Micra. Dad, come on. I could do with a new car. I go, oh, yeah. Okay, good luck. Yeah, okay, I'll drive you to a dealer. And I knew what's coming next. And then, Dad, any chance you can lend me 15 grand for the car? I'm going, yeah, all right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm clearly made of money. Yeah, I'm a teacher, but okay, we'll sort it, or I'll guarantee the loan, or we sort it. And I know that my kid is never going to pay me because they've got student debt. Rent has gone off the scale for young people renting anywhere, and the cost of living is bonkers. And they know I'm Dad, and whilst I can be a bit of an arse at times, I'm never going to ask for the money back. And that's a relationship between Robbie and Colchester United. In theory, he's owed £40,177,000. But he knows that the club will never generate anything like that. It's probably, its revenue probably 5 to 6 million a year. So that's 6 or 7 years revenue before you pay the wage. And the club's actually losing, based on my figures, the club lost 70 grand a week in 24-25. So the club will never be in that position. So yeah, he'll write it off. And what might happen is that he'll agree a deal where I don't know what the asking price would be. I would imagine, looking at the numbers I'm seeing, I probably think he'd be looking for 10 to 12 mil if he can get that. And then
about 14, I think, which seems
I think 14. I think it could be 14 including add-ons. So if you get up into League One, then within 2 years it could go that high. I think 14. I think he'd do well, but I'm not saying it's impossible. It's what, 1970? Was it 71? 70, 71? I've been. I was saying earlier that I went to Colchester United versus Leeds, because I used to live in Chelmsford when I was a kid. And the last time I went there was with Brighton. That must have been best part of 20 years ago. So
very different trajectories, us and Brighton, those last 20 years.
And that's luck of the gods. Sometimes Brighton signed Bobby Zamora, who went on to play for England. When he was in League Two. So sometimes things can work out for you, and that's why I never moan about a particular result, because I was there. I remember going to Rochdale on a Tuesday night and getting dicked 4-0 and getting stuffed by Darlington and plenty of other clubs. So I just happy to be able to watch football. So when it comes to the new owners, first of all, they're going to have to go and pay Robbie somewhere between, I think 10 to 12 million pounds. Might be able to negotiate a bit more. You know the status of the stadium. You know the status of the training facilities. Do they need to invest in that? It's a bit like if you're buying a house which is dilapidated, you'll knock 50 grand off the asking price because you say, well, I need to go and put in a new bathroom. I need to do this and need to do that. It's exactly the same when it comes to football. So you're in a far better position to assess that than I can, having not been there for a while. And then you say, well, okay, Colchester lost £3.5 million last year. Show us the money now. This is what the EFL was saying. This is what the regulator. Show us your money that you can absorb those losses for the next 2 years. Because otherwise, you're all fur coat and no knickers, aren't you? You all say, yeah, we're coming in, we can run the club, and then they'll give the spiel. They'll give the absolute nonsense. We can run it on a sustainable basis. No, you can't. Okay, I can assure you, you can't do it. You might think you can, unless you want to go and play next season in the conference. And when you do that, you'll lose all of your money from the Premier League in what we call solidarity payments. You'll lose half the money you get parachute payments for 2 years from the EFL. Your TV money will drop from around about 1.2, 1.3 mil to probably 250 grand. So you're £1 million down like that. And the National League is brutal. And it's also, I'm not saying it's bent, but I did a podcast last week with two owners of one was the National League and one was the Isthmian League, and the stories that you hear about players being paid off book and various financial shenanigans taking place are A, very common, and B, quite disturbing. That it just seems to be accepted. It just seems to be the norm, and there's not a lot the National League can do because it's running on a shoestring itself. So that's what the regulator's going to do. Are you a scumbag? We can sort that out fairly quickly. Do you have the money? Yes or no? Can you afford to run it for a couple of years? Yes or no? And what the regulator then does, which we haven't had before, it says where to get the money from. Because I ended up doing a talk for I was asked by the National Crime Agency and Interpol and Europol, which yes, that was good on my CV. Ever do that? So I gave a talk, and I used to be an accountant, but I was a crap accountant, and when my son was young, we realised he had autism, and sort of working in the private sector and the demands there. So I bailed out and became a teacher just for the bit of flexibility that it gave me. But I can add up, and I can spot. Now and then I can spot dodgy things in accounts. So I was giving this talk, and then I was talking to some senior criminal officers about football, and they were saying one of the things about the regulator, which has gone completely undetected, is the fact that there's a lot of fraud in football. Because if you are a criminal organisation and you're wanting to launder money, there's only so much you can get away with by overstating the money you're making from your nail bar or your vape shop or your phone repair shop. We know what these places are like, and it doesn't take a rocket science. But they said football, HMRC don't really understand what's going on at football. If you say we've signed a couple of players, and as a result of that, the crowd's up by 800 a match, and so that's 800, and the average, we're averaging £25 or averaging 20 quid per fan, or 800 times £20 is what, 16 grand. You do that 25 times a year, kapow! I've just laundered 400-500 grand. So there are things taking place in football which are going completely undetected, and I think it's fair to say that the regulator is in touch with other government agencies with a view to trying to, where you've got suspicions, and I also have to say there are many, many brilliant people who are owners of football clubs who wouldn't have anything to do with this whatsoever, but that isn't a universal truth.
Yeah, and it's always a bit of sort of a murky environment at times when you don't quite know what the underbelly of a sort of a field has. A lot of people, when they have a takeover, assume that there's going to be increased spending, that someone's going to come in and sort of cut the purse strings, and all of a sudden money's being splashed left, right and centre. Is that the case? Does the pattern suggest that happens, or is it more of a case of being a bit more prudent and a bit more sensible?
It sometimes happens. If we take a look at what happened with Carlisle United, they were acquired 18 months ago, 2 years ago, by an American family. I can't remember the name, is it the Perdicks or something like that? But American family, mum, dad, kids, sort of, this was sort of the classic American philanthropists. We've seen this, we've seen the city of Carlisle. We've fallen in love with the surrounding areas, and so we want to buy a football club. And they say, right, we're putting football club, and we're going to put some money in. We're going to make changes. at this club, and the losses that Carlisle made were quite spectacular. And they've gone from League One to the National League because spending it and spending it well are not the same thing. And one of the things which does concern me, again, I'm looking at Carlisle's figures here. Carlisle lost 5 million quid on revenue of less than 7. So that they're losing almost £1 for every pound that they made, brought through the door. In football, it's an old Mike Tyson comment. He used to say, I had a friend for every dollar I earned as a boxer. And when I stopped earning, I had no friends. That is the football industry. It is full of sharks. It's full of people who will pretend to be your mate. Oh, you just bought Carlisle United? Oh, I'm an agent. I tell you what, I know a little bit about football that you might not. Take a look at these 3 lads here on my books. Absolutely fantastic. Next minute you're signing them, you're paying them. Carlisle were paying £3,000 a week on average in a division where the average was 2,300. So they're paying £600 a week more than the majority of the clubs, and that they still got relegated. So it's a dangerous industry. If you do want to put that money in, there are some people who will come in and will stick to their budget, but they get quite bored very quickly, and then they lose common sense. It's amazing. You've got people who have become multi-millionaires, because you need to be a multi-millionaire, who have been phenomenally successful in their own line of business. They know exactly what to do in terms of revenue maximisation, in terms of cost control, in terms of budgets, in terms of cash management. And they walk into the boardroom of a football club and they leave their brain in the car park. They leave their business brain and they instead they get a football brain, and they think that they're playing Football Manager, except with real footballers. And we've all played Football Manager, and after 3 seasons you go, no, it's not working, is it? Delete, we'll restart.
New start, regen.
Exactly. And that's fine if it's a community game. But when you are dealing with a community asset, a community hub, I think football, I do a little bit of work with Samaritans because as blokes, let's face it, we're useless. We're useless when we're falling apart. And I think football does give you that safe space where you can say to your mate, can I just have a word with you? I'm really struggling. There's things. And I think your football mates, I think we all rally round. So I think football is absolutely wonderful for blokes. And I'll do this sales pitch. Suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50 in England. It's a frightening statistic. I think without football, those statistics would be worse.
Yeah, completely agree. It's certainly a safe haven for lots of different people and people from lots of different backgrounds, and it allows people to come together and have that form of escapism. For Colchester United fans specifically, they're obviously refreshing the hashtags on X and looking on BBC Sport to get that sort of breaking news of a takeover happening, and obviously the name that we get at the moment is John Terry as the sort of face of a consortium. What are the key things that supporters should look out for in terms of that ownership and long-term planning? And in your opinion, just to sort of make it a 2-part question, does having someone like John Terry as the face of a consortium, someone who has a lot of experience within football, knows sort of the inner workings of it, how much does that give sort of substance to a consortium?
I think going back to your first question, John Terry's front of house, if I was a Colchester United fan, I want to know who's back of house. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, where's the money coming from? Because it's not coming from John Terry. He's been a very successful professional footballer. He will have been guided by his management team, and his management team, his agent will say, if you want to put a bit of money in, fine, but make sure yours is a very small fraction. So who is he being the front of house for? And then doing the background checks. Do these people have an online presence? If they have businesses, how long have those businesses been in existence? You don't want to end up in a similar position to that of Derby County. They had a guy called Eric Alonso who was going to buy the club. And Eric was posting on Instagram. There was photographs of his apartment in Dubai, and everybody going, blimey, that looks pretty tasty. And then somebody did a bit of checks and say, it asked Google, where's this apartment? And it turns out it was not owned by Eric Alonso. And it all started to unravel. Then they had a preferred bidder, a guy called Chris Kirchner, and he ran some sort of AI-based company which did stuff. And nobody ever heard of him before. And I looked at his numbers and I go, well, doesn't seem to be making any profits, and he's come from nowhere. And there's some really good sports journalists out there. Matt Slater of The Athletic is one of my favourites. He's absolutely brilliant at what he does, and he spotted a few things. And it turns out that Chris Kirchner was just a white boy. And he's now doing, I think, something like 15 years inside for fraud, wire fraud, as they call it in the United States. So doing background checks in exactly that. I use this family analogy. Outside of your family, your football club is the most important thing in your life. So if you're having a babysitter or if you're employing a childminder to look after your kid, you make sure that you do your background checks on them before you let them anywhere near your family. Do exactly the same with that football club. So that's what I'm doing. Where is their money coming from? For how long have they been generating that money? Do they have any connections with other parties that perhaps we would be slightly hesitant about, and so on? As far as what John Terry can bring to front of house, well, we've seen it at one extreme with Rob and Ryan at Wrexham, transformed the business. We're seeing it to a lesser extent at Swansea with Snoop Dogg, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Luka Modric. Now, Luka Modric, in my opinion, probably a better footballer than John Terry. He's taken his country to a World Cup final. He's played for Real Madrid. You look at his list of trophies, and I'm not putting John Terry down in any way. He's been a very successful footballer. Well, Luka Modric will have earned just as much money. He hasn't put a lot of that money into Swansea City Football Club, I can assure you. So what they can do is that if under the new ownership, if the deal goes ahead, what are you trying to do? Well, you're trying to sign deals with commercial partners. You're trying to build relationships with sponsors. You're trying to attract people to come into the hospitality boxes and so on. If the first person you meet and you're shaking hands with John Terry, you go, blimey, this is serious. This is a step up. So I think he can be really useful at turning possible deals into completed deals. But he is not going to be providing the funding from his own pocket for the acquisition or for the ongoing losses of the club. I'm pretty certain of that.
I think that's a fairly safe assumption to have as well. Kieran, just to sort of wrap things up, obviously the price of football, as we've mentioned, is hugely successful, and the growth of it has been amazing to see. Just for you fans who perhaps haven't listened or are unaware of what the price of football is, just a sort of little bit about it from you, where you fans can find it.
Well, you can. We've now just started up on YouTube. Which is probably not a good idea. Who wants to look at two blokes in their mid-60s who were born in South London, and you'll very quickly realise perhaps haven't been to the gym as often as they should have been. But I do this show. We've been going now for 7 years. It was the idea of one of the business reporters at the BBC, and we look at the money behind the beautiful game. And we treat every club with the same degree of respect, because being a Colchester United fan is just important to you as being a Chelsea fan is to a Chelsea Football Club. So we cover stories from all of the pyramid. We're quite lucky that we managed to get guests in from different aspects. So we've had one episode with the pie seller. What happens to your pies before the match? And sort of we had Leicester City's groundsman. We found that his budget was £2 million a year for the grass on the pitch, and stories that if Jamie Vardy was playing, they would cut the grass in a different way, and they would put a different amount of water on before the kickoff. The science which goes into football and which can have financial impacts. We're lucky. The head of Scottish football comes on at least once a year. We've got a pretty good relationship with the EFL. We've got the chief executive of the National League coming on. I've taught. I teach for the League Managers Association, so I teach football managers. I teach for the PFA, and it's really weird if you're in a classroom and I've got Ilkay Gundogan, Jordan Henderson, Tyrone Mings, Ben Davies, Robbie Fowler. I'm thinking, decent five-a-side team we've got here, and so on. But what we're trying to do at the PFA, we got this strap line. We're going from dressing room to classroom to boardroom, because footballers know more about football industry than all of these hedge fund managers and all of these other people. So we try to cover as many stories as possible, and then I do a weekly show where listeners phone in questions or email in questions, and then my job as the nerd is to go away and research them and to try to give them answers which are A, accurate, and B, sort of engaging to make people to want. And we've got a backlog of about 8 or 9 months worth of questions. Such is the enthusiasm of our listener base.
Amazing. Kieran, thank you so much for coming on and sharing an insight into the wider football finance sort of environment, and specifically to Colchester United as well. We've really appreciated it.
Thanks for the invite. To say I have a big affection for Colchester United because I grew up as a kid in Chelmsford. So having been to that match against Leeds United, it still resonates me. I remember going into school on the following Monday, and it was the biggest story in the playground, and I was about 9. If it did that today, I think my parents would be locked up.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Kieran, and best of luck with your next interview that you'll be going on today.